Now we're on Daf Chaf Amid Beis. Amaleh. Rabbi Bar Kamma responds to Rav Chizda, who vacillated about a case of Zelo Chaser, where the Baal did not lose anything, V'zeh Nenes, where the person who packed into his friend's Chaser saved himself what normally would have been rental fees. Masnisani. I'm going to quote a Mishnah, and from this Mishnah, we're going to be able to answer your question and determine what's the status and the halacha in the case of Zeh Nene v'Zeh Chas. Amalei, so Rabbi Bar Kamma, his curiosity was piqued, and he said to him, please, can you tell me? I'm sorry, Rav Chizda asks, to get the names right, Rav Chizda asks Rabbi Bar Kamma, please tell me, I beg you, tell me which Mishnah is going to answer my question. Amalei, Rabbi Bar Kamma was playing hard to get. L'chita shameshli. I want to see shimush. After you mashamish me, you're my Talmud, then I can reveal to you which Mishnah I had in mind. So what did Rav Chizda do? Shakal sudrei karachle. He took the kerchief of Rabbi Bar Kamma and he folded it up, and that makes him into a mashamish esrabah. Amalei, Rabbi Bar Kamma says, I'm going to derive the answer to your question from the Mishnah in the case of an animal that ate Peres B'Shus HaRabim. And the Mishnah establishes that the owner of the animal, even though he's potter from what? From the Zikin, because Shein B'Shus HaRabim is potter, but nevertheless he has to pay for the Hanor that he had. So this is Nene. Why is it Lo Chaser? So the answer is Adam Shemeniach Peirosa B'Shus HaRabim Mafkir Osan. He was Mafkir then. So I'm not sure about this, because if he was mafkir, why does he have a right to be tovea hano? Okay, let's see. And the Mishnah paskins im nenes mishalemis masha nenes. So even though it was lo chaser, because as we said it was hefker, nevertheless you have to pay for the hano. And so too in the case of zenen of zeluchas, you have to pay for the hano. Amar Rava. Rava now rejects the proof from Mishnah from Rabbi Bar Kamma, lo choli v'lo margish gavra de mori siate. In other words, he was praising Rabbi Bar Kamma as someone who relies on Hashem, and he doesn't have to fear any evil. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is always there to protect him. Rav Chizda accepted the analysis of Rabbi Bar Kamma because Hashem was protecting Rabbi Bar Kamma from the onslaught of Rav Chizda. But in truth, Rav Chizda's analogy is not an exact analogy, to say the least. In the case of our Mishnah, that the animal ate the peros of someone's peros in Rishus HaRabim, zeh nene v'zeh chosen. So once again, I still have to solve that one problem about Hefker, but let's leave that out for a moment. So again, the suffix of Rav Chizda was about a case of Zeh Nene v'Zeh Lo Chaser. Our Mishnah says he has to pay for the Hano because the Baal Peres was Chaser. I guess it's like a case where he was mafkir, but only on the condition that no one else takes it. But your suffix, Rav Chizda, in a case of a chatzah designated for rental is zenenev v'zel lo chaser. So it could be that you don't have to pay in that case because even though he's hana, but there was no chisaron. The Baal HaChotzer didn't suffer any loss. It wasn't intended or earmarked for rental. But in this case, the Baal HaBehemo Cheles caused a hefsed to the Baal HaPeros because he lost his peros. So now the Gemara is going to turn around and face Rami Bar Chama and ask Rami Bar Chama, why did you make this analogy? And he says, Stam peros b'shusarav mafkure mafkir lahu. So now we go back to Hefker again. If he put his peros down in b'shusarav, it means he was mafkir them. So therefore, it's lo chassid. So why does he have a right to claim? Why does he have a right to claim on no? You have anything in your notes here? I mean, I'm. Oh, final. You see, Tosfos Divra Maskell Afkure. This is a key Tosfos. I'm sorry I missed it. You know, sometimes when you're preparing the Daf Yomi, you don't get a chance to look at Tosfos. Look how many Tosfos there are on this page. Zok Tosfos Lo Legamri, whatever that means, but it wasn't a complete hefker. The Imkain Afilu Mashenenes Lo Mishalim. Ella misyayish mehem shesover she's kalkalu machma sherav and dorsim aleim ad shelo yavo. What's the next word? Lidomi. There seems to be a textual problem here. What is that? A test? Second. He says, Ad shelo yavo elo lidami. I guess it means lidmei, not lidami. Lidmei mashenenis. So I think the key word here in this Tosfos is sheis kalkalu. You see that word sheis kalkalu, Rabbi? On the fourth line, we should underline that word. In other words, his hefker was like a partial or conditional hefker. If it be miskalkel, then he's mafkir. If he can get someone to eat those pears and pay him dmei hana before the kilkul is total, then he's not mafkir. He wants it back. So therefore, this is considered zeh nene v'zeh chaser. And therefore, he has to pay. But again, we have to always emphasize that in Rami Bar Chama's frame of reference, this is equal to Zen Enevizel Lo Chaser, because there was an act of hefker, albeit a partial act of hefker, and that's considered Lo Chaser. Tanan. Now the Gemara is going to try to bring a proof to establish the halacha of Zen Enevizel Lo Chaser. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah of Bava Daf Dalet Amid Beis Hamakiv Chavero Misholosh Ruchosov. So let's say Shimon is inside. You'll see that in the picture of Rashi. And Reuven has sados on three sides that surround Shimon's field. And Reuven goes ahead and builds a gader, a fence, to keep out animals from the field. And Goder es harishon v'sashni v'sashlish say mechayveno. So Shimon inside doesn't have to pay for the Goder. And he's saying, I didn't benefit from your Goder because you only surrounded me on 3 sides. The animals will come in on the 4th side. So the Gemara's medayik from the Mishnah that ha reveres, if Ruvain was Goder on all 4 sides, so now we have a complete circle around Shimon's field, the inner field, then mechayvenosa. Then Shimon has to pay, which means he pays 50% in the expenditure of the fence. Ruvain in the outer fields would have put up the Goder even if he owned the inner field and there was no Shimon. So it's not because Shimon was there in the meantime that Ruvain spent the money to build the fence. On the other hand, Shimon was Nene. And the Mishnah says, by implication, that Shimon has to pay. So you see that Hana is Machayev, even in the case of Lo Chassid. And the Gemara rejects. Shiny Hasam di Amalei Ato Ga'at Garamt Li Hekefi Yisera. The reason why Ruvain could be Toveh Shimon is because he has to expand the amount of fencing. Meaning if Shimon wasn't there, then it would be a smaller area that Ruvain would have to fence around. He expanded the fence for the sake of Shimon, but not as an act of altruism, to get brownie points, but he had no choice. So that Shimon's inner field forces the circumference to be that much larger and wider, and therefore Ruvain expended more money to create this Goder to surround a larger area. And that's why he has the right to demand payment from Shimon, because now it's a case of Zen Ene V'Zeh Chassid. Toshmas, the Gemara says, I'm going to bring you a proof from the Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Yossi. Now, what happens in the Mishnah Bava Basra? After Ruvain surrounds Shimon on 3 sides, Shimon himself put up the 4th segment of the God. That's Rabbi Yossi's point. On Rabbi Yossi, im Amad HaNikaf, Nikaf is Shimon in the inside field, the Goder es Haravias, and he put the 4th side up. Then Megalgalon Ol Vesakol. Now Shimon was Megaladas that he's very happy with this Goder. That's why he wanted the Goder to be complete and keep out the animals from all sides. So that's why he went ahead, Shimon, and he put up the 4th side. So now let's be Medayik. Time of the Goder Nikaf. The reason why the Nikaf has to pay is because he took money out of his pocket and put up the 4th fence. Hamakif, if it would have been Shimon who put up the 4th fence, Potter. Shmamino zenene v'zelo chaser Potter. Shimon does not have to chip in as a partner in the Gderos of Ruvain, even though he's being nene from him. So you see clearly that zenene v'zelo chaser Potter. Now, it's very strange because this raya is from Rabbi Yossi, and the Chacham rejected Rabbi Yossi. So why is the Gemara bring a proof from Rabbi Yossi? So the answer apparently is, says Tosas Dima Maskal Taima, that even the Rabbanon who say that he's chayav, that's because they hold that the makif is considered chaser because of the Hekefi Yisera, that he had to expand, that Reuven had to expand the size of the fence. But in the case of Zen Nene, And Zel Lo Chaser, everybody agrees that he's potter. And the Gemara rejects. Shiny Hossam, the Omar Le, Shimon, the inner Balasod, that's right to say to Reuven, Ludidi, Sagili Benetira Bar Zuza. You know what? I'll pay you for a fence that's worth a zuz. Just put up a couple of, cheap kunim. And that would separate my field from the animals that might want to come in. So really, the total anah of Shimon is one zuz. And that's considered zelonena. That's insignificant. Toshma. Now we quote a Mishnah at the end of Bava Metzia Kuf Yud Zayin. Habayis v'aliyah shel shnayim. You have a bayis that's built on private property, but the aliyah, the gag on top of the bayis, belongs to another owner. So you split the ownership between the karka and the aliyah. Shenoflu. Now everything collapsed. Omar Bala Aliyah Lebal Habayis Livnos. The owner of the top floor says to the owner of the bottom floor, you know what? You have to rebuild the house. Once you rebuild the house, I will build the second floor, but I can't build the second floor until you replace the first floor. Vahu. But the owner of the bottom floor ain't a rotzen. He refuses. Harei bal aliyah bona bayis v'yoshiv ba achiyiten lo yitziosa. So the balabais is going to build a house from scratch on the karka, and he's going to dwell there and enjoy the benefit of it until the balabais, who owns the bottom floor, will pay him for the expenditures of the lower floor. And the Gemara's medayik. Yitziyosef hu d'mechayev le. The Baal Aliyah could only demand payment for the money that he spent, what we call expenditures. Right? Hu d'mechayev le balabais. Hoscharo. Lo. So wait a second. I'm confused. Who's actually living in the bayis? Just 1 second. So after the bottom floor is built, then the Baal Aliyah builds the second floor. And in the meantime, the Baal Abayis of the bottom floor is living in the house on the bayis that was built by the Baal Aliyah. And therefore the Baal Aliyah has a right to say to the Baal Abayis, pay me for schirus. And yet the Mishnah says that he only has to pay him for yitzios and not for schar dira. Why doesn't he have to pay him for schar dira? That even though the Baal Abayis is gaining, because otherwise he'd have to pay rental to live and have a roof over his head, nevertheless the Baal Aliyah doesn't lose anything here because he's living in the top floor. So therefore we can conclude that Zenenev Zelo Chaser is potter. Gemara rejects it and says no. It's possible Zenenev Zelo Chaser is chai. But shiny Chaser de Beisal Aliyah Mishtabe. The Gemara formulates now a new principle. And that is that the Baal Haliyah has a schus called Beisal Aliyah Mishtabe. So this is not called Nene Mimomon Chavira. Why isn't this called Nena Mimomon Chavero? There's a schus to the Baal Aliyah. I think if I understand the Gemara correctly, you cannot bill the balabais on the bottom floor for schirus, even though he saves that money, but not because zen enev zelo chos is potter, but for a different reason. It's kind of like a deal. It's like a quid per quo, which means what? That the balabais is holding up the bal aliyah. Because without the balabais on the bottom, there's no aliyah. So that's a different halacha. I'll just read to you quickly the language of the Masechet here. He says, Shabayis mishubad lisbol es haliyah al gabo. The kaven sheyesh schus lebala aliyah shal bala bayis lisbol es aliyaso. It's almost as if the balabais on the bottom has a shibud, a financial obligation to hold up the bala aliyah. Now, quid pro quo, he gets a schus to live in the house. We're going to have to stop soon, but let's see if we can maybe chaperine a few more lines. We'll have to finish up Chaf Amid Beis B'lineda tomorrow, but let's see if we can get a little bit further towards the end. Toshma. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Af zeh hador b'chatzero b'chatzer chavero, shalom idaitu tzorch lahalos lo schar. So Rabbi Yehuda represents the dissenting view in that Mishnah of Bayis V'aliyah, and Enochinami, the Baal Bayis on the bottom floor, has to pay schir, Shma mino zed nenev zelo choser chaya. Shani hasa mishum shachurisa di ashiyasa. That when the person called the balabais of the tachton lives in the lower floor, he has to pay for another reason, because he's basically causing wear and tear to the house. He's causing, when he uses his stove to cook, the black smoke rises and sort of like destroys the kotel, the walls of the house. And in that case, we paskin that ze nenev ze choser is chayah. And why is it choser? Because the living of the balabayis is on the bottom floor is detracting from the value of the house. Shalchua, the Bnei Yeshiva, sent a suffix of Zen Enev Zelo Chaser Bei Rav Rabbi Ami to Rabbi Ami. Omer Rabbi Ami says, "V'chima asalo uma chisaro." If the person lives in the house, he's not causing any loss because the bias is not omid l'schirus. Umahi ziko, and if he lives in the house, he doesn't change the house. And therefore he's potter. So that's the opinion of Rabbi Am. Rav Chia bar Abba Omar, he disagrees. Nisyashe b'dovar, we're going to think about it again, re-examine it. And Hadar Shlachu Kameid Rabbi Chia bar Abba, when they sent it back for a second round, Omar, Kuli hai sholchu li v'yozli. They've asked me this question over and over again. Ilu ashkechei b'tayim lo shlach lichulu. If I came up with an answer to your question, whether you're potter or chayiv, wouldn't I send you an answer? In other words, he wasn't so keen about Rabbi Ami's conclusion that Zen Enev is a lo chaser is patur. And now the Gemara is going to go on to establish a machlokas amuroim regarding Rabbi Yochanan. What's the din if somebody lives in the chotzer of his friend without permission? Squatter. Itmar Rav Kahana Omer Rabbi Yochanan. He quotes Rabbi Yochanan as saying, "Eino tzarich lahalos lo schar." But Rabbi Avo Omer Rabbi Yochanan, he quotes Rabbi Yochanan as saying, "Tzarich lahalos lo schar." That zen enev is lo chaser is chay. Omer Papa, Hod Rabbi Abba lav beferish itmar ela bechlala itmar. That statement of Rabbi Abba was not said explicitly, but we could derive it by implication. Disnan, because we have a Mishnah Masechet Me'ila Daf Yutes Amid Beis. Not al gizbar a moment al hegdesh hamamun al hegdesh even al korosh al hegdesh hareza loma. In other words, the gizbar never takes it out of the rishus of hegdesh, and therefore that's not considered me'ilah. But nisana lechavero, if the gizbar now gives it as a gift, this korah, this even to his friend, then he takes it out of the rishus of hegdesh, and huma the gizbar is chayav for me'ilah. V'chavero loma. Because the chaver, who's on the recipient end, he wasn't motzi the the hegdesh lechulin. It was the gizbar who was motzi lechulin through the nesina. Now, if the gizbar does not take the even out of the rishus of hegdesh, but rather bino letoch beso, he builds it into his house. Hareza lomol at sheyodu tachteo. At what point is the gizbar chayav for me'ilah when he lives in the house that was built with an even of hegdesh for the value of a pruta? The Omer Shmuel, and Shmuel again, me'ilah is always b'shav pruta, and Shmuel says for who shehinicha al pi aruba. That which it says that he's only chayav as a moel only at the point where he lives in the house, that's because he put the even not in the binyan itself, in the structure of the walls, but rather he put it on top of the skyline. So really, he never changed in any essential way the even. But if, says Shmuel, he actually was kovet part of the binyan, then that's called me'ilah, because he was motzi rishus hegdesh through the shino. He made a change. So meres, we should derive from this Mishnah that hadar bechotzer chaver shalom midaito tzarich lahalos lo schar. When he lives in the house and he didn't have rishus from hegdesh, then he's chayav. He's chayav to pay schar. V'shosakle, and Rabbi Yochanan said nothing. So it sounds like he was moded to Rabbi Avo. But Rabbi Avo Savar, the Shosik modele. From the fact that Rabbi Yochanan was quiet and he didn't reject it, it's proof that he was moded, he consented. And therefore we see clearly that according to Rabbi Yochanan, is zen enev is zelo chaser is chayim, because hadar b'chotzer chavero shalom midaito, says Shmuel, tzorich lahalos lo schar, and Rabbi Yochanan was shosei v'loi ashkuchi lo ashkach be. Rabbi Yochanan wasn't paying attention to the statement of Shmuel, because Rabbi Yochanan felt that there was no equation between hegdesh and dar b'chotzer chavero. We're not going to say in the case of hegdesh that it's shalom midas. Right? There's always das with regard to hegdesh. So therefore, in hegdesh, this is considered midas. Kidarabba diyom rabba hegdesh shalom midas kehejo midas dom. So I'm going to suggest that this will go over bli neder, this last piece of Gemara. There's a shakavitaria. We got the basics, but we need a lot more work on this. Okay, then? So Mitzvah Hashem, I think we said tomorrow at 3. And tomorrow at what time? It's at 3:30, right? You'll correct me if I'm wrong. All right, have a good night.